what is there in for the developing nations to constrain their own growth? I mean, how this is easy to understand in a developed nation.
Yeah.
But a nation developing like India or Brazil, they have no reason to constrain their energy usage. I mean, they haven't seen the growth yet.
No, I understand that absolutely everybody wants to enjoy a high quality of life and a high standard of living. And this is part of the story. I don't know if there's an easy answer to it, because some of the developing nations are just going to have come to the story just a little bit late. That if what I've showed you in terms of the energy possibilities are true, it means that the dream of everybody living in the equivalent of Palo Alto, it might not come to pass. So the question then becomes, well, how are we going to apportion the resources? There's a huge undercurrent of social justice and equitable distribution of resources that sits under this story that I leave for other people, because this is, my kitchen is about raising awareness. But there is an enormous story to that, and I don't have the answers to all of that, but it's certainly something that I think is going to be a source of a lot of concern, a lot of attention, maybe even some friction as we go forward, because fundamentally there's going to be, I think, some angry individuals out there saying, hey, wait a minute, I got this close to the brass ring, right? So I appreciate it. I understand what you're saying. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the talk. I've read a number of similar accounts in the past, and I've tried really hard to figure out what doesn't make sense about them, and I haven't been able to. They all make perfect sense. There is one thing with which I'm struggling. It's not a secret. The information is out there. Maybe politicians have some perverted incentives to disregard it or to not believe it, but there are hedge fund managers which control massive amounts of money, which have every incentive in the world to make as much money as possible. They certainly have access to the information. It is mind-blowing to me that they haven't shorted oil stocks, or that they still rely on huge growth projections for any company in just about any sector. Meaning, it's shocking to me that the growth projections haven't come down. How is it that this information hasn't made its way into actual financial market decisions and hasn't kind of, through efficiency mechanisms, been reflected in stock market prices?
I actually think it has made it in, and I'll tell you how I think it's made it in. My observation, and I might be wrong, I was a very active trader for a while, so I feel like I had a pretty good handle on how markets worked. They started shifting pretty strongly in 2003 and 2004. We had a lot of computers, black boxes that came in. Now we've got a situation where a significant proportion of trading is done by black boxes, high-frequency trading boxes, arbitrage, sub-millisecond trading units, all these things. So we've got what appears to me is a collapse of the time frame of the investment horizons, which is perfectly consistent with the story. And the way I spin this narrative, it looks to me like there's more and more participants playing musical chairs. They've really cut down their trading cycles. Nobody's buying and holding for 20, 30 years in the open markets, right? They're buying for minutes, milliseconds sometimes. And so it looks to me like all the participants have started to really narrow down because they don't know what's going on out there. So they've started to be highly liquid, moving things around. We've seen that. That's the chaos in the markets to me, is we're watching hot money flood from market to market, and it's just looking around for places to go. So that to me is consistent with this story. The other side of that is we're seeing more and more the most profitable industries are being taken out of circulation. They're being brought into private equity deals, and they're being taken off of the gaming table, as it were, with the good cash flows are coming out. So all of these things to me are really consistent with people's time horizons shrinking. And maybe this story is part of the context for that. Maybe it's just some other developments. I'm sure it is. But one of the things that we note in history is that high interest rates, or a high discount rate, so this story would be a discount rate, a high interest rate shortens people's time horizons. So if you have a really high interest rate, you build kind of a crappy stick house. Like in the 70s, we can find a lot of interesting houses from that high interest rate period. When were the cathedrals of Europe that lasted 1,000 years, when were those built? They were built right after the Black Plague came through, for the most part. And they were built under a system where money wasn't the limiting factor, it was labor. So money was actually at 0% during that period. It's interesting. Money at 0%, meaning it stretched people's time horizons out. Here they are coming out of the plague, and the first thing they thought was, hey, let's build something that'll last 1,000 years. I mean, it was really phenomenal to me that came out. So I actually think that we are seeing a real shrinking of time horizons in how people are investing. In fact, my personal view is that a lot of the markets right now are more a matter of speculation than investment. Did that answer it?
Thank you.
I've got a question about Iceland. Lots of energy, horrible economy at this point. Do you think it's going to pick up? And also, could you touch on Kyoto and cap and trade? You hear that it's bad, it's good, things like that.
Yeah, so Iceland, well, Iceland really got in trouble because of the actions of a relatively small number of people in the banking system, really getting out of their league and getting their heads handed to them. But Iceland does have one of the most critical things out there. It has abundant energy, geothermal energy, which it can tap in pretty significant amounts if it needs to. So I think Iceland, if they got their arms around the story correctly and started to use their energy in a correct fashion, I think they have something upon which to build. They've got a lot of abundant natural resource right there, which they could do all kinds of things with. The Kyoto and the cap and trade, I haven't spent a lot of time analyzing those, so I'm going to sort of beg off on that. It's something that's really out of my bailiwick. So if that's okay, I'll leave that one for now.
Okay. Over the period of centuries, many people have come and gone who used to think like you. I don't know whether I should consider them as realists or pessimists. They have all been proven wrong. We have seen continuous, sustained economic growth. We have sent satellites on Mars.
Mm-hmm.
We have produced supersonic jets. We have done very good in health care and everything. Why should I consider that you are right this time? Why should I consider? What is different in you, or what have you seen in this entire economic data or whatever you're seeing? Why should I consider you that you are the right man, and this time things are going to go down?
Right.
No, because I've read history, and I'm also studying economics, and I know about all these. Thomas Malthus is one of your probably most famous role model, Thomas Malthus, if you know about him.
Right. The question is...
He came in 1834 or something, he died. He had similar views, population is growing, we are depleting resources, but nothing of this sort has happened. Over the 100 years, we have improved on everything.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me why.
So
And by the way, I've seen your crash course, 3
Good.
hours, yes. And that to 1 year before.
Good.
1 year from now, yeah, I've seen that. So tell me, I know about you. I got an opportunity to talk to you.
Because I say so.
Thomas Malthus in the 1700s postulated that humans were growing geometrically and land was arithmetic in its dimensions. And so he's been held up as an example of how these sorts of predictions that I seem to be making are prone to failure. My answer to that at this stage is that if you think Thomas Malthus had access to the same quantity of information I do today, then you've got a pretty good point to make. But Thomas Malthus did not have access to the same sort of information we have today. We have enormous information at our fingertips. There's both a blessing and a curse to living in this time. We've got fabulous information. I'm really happy and proud to live in a country where I can get access to it. So we hear, I just operate on some facts. Here's a fact. Global oil discovery peaked in 1964. You have to find it before you produce it. And it didn't just peak, it peaked with a perfect little bell curve. In order for this story, at least about oil, to be off, one thing we would have to consider is that we're going to suddenly discovering vast new quantities of fields in excess of what we found in the 60s. And if you look at the chart, and I wish I'd brought it with me, you'll realize what a tall mountain that is to climb, because we went up, we went down. I've also heard, you didn't use it, but you should. Use this next time if we have a chance. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. That's a good one, too. Right? Because we went from stones to bronze to steel, all that stuff, right? But in energy, we went from wood to coal to oil. I need to know what's that question mark. I need to know what's under that. That's what needs to be defined at this point in time. Because we don't have another source of energy. The things we hear about hydrogen, it's not a source of energy. It's a store of energy. There's no vast pools of hydrogen we're going to tap, right? We make it from stuff at an energy loss, because that's the unfortunate part of the second law of thermodynamics. So we don't have an answer yet for where we're going to get that next source of energy. And as a biologist, I just have this very deep understanding that energy is the source of life. right? So when I was in the lab growing nerve cells, that's what I did. I was a neurotoxicologist for a while. So I would grow nerves in flasks, and they would develop these beautiful architectures with dendrites and synapses and their axons, and they'd be like just enormously complicated, unless you forgot to feed them for a couple days, and you came in and look at them, these little balls. Very unhappy under the microscope. Complexity requires energy to flow through it, and I hold that as a very deep principle. And so it is one of my understandings that I can't figure out yet where we're going to get that energy from. And so as soon as we can have that conversation, and it could be these alternative energies that we talked about, but I need to see it at least penciled out on a napkin that says, here's how we're going to replace all those quadrillions of BTUs from oil that's going to start dropping off. Not just replace the stuff that's missing, but increase our increments by the 2 to 3% that we need to sustain the type of economic growth we've been having. So let's be very clear about this. I'm not saying that the world ends because we run out of oil. I'm saying that the type of economy around which we fashioned our hopes, our dreams, our lives, that's at risk of not functioning quite like we grew up expecting it to function. And I'm just asking you to consider that that's a possibility.
Don't you think that there will be some other John D. Rockefeller coming up very soon with some other Standard Oil, something like Standard Oil?
I'm all ears.
I'm hopeful.
Listen, I like to be hopeful too, but as I said, hope alone is a terrible strategy. I need to know what that next source of energy is, and I haven't seen it yet.
Thank you very much for the presentation. The question I have is, given the current political situation, for instance, let's take alternate energy, the cost of energy today does not really reflect the true social marginal cost. It is generally just the private marginal cost. So we are actually subsidizing green power and not taxing brown power. What you are proposing is sort of a cap on consumption, realizing what the true cost of energy is. But given our short political careers of the politicians, they're always looking at selling a better quality of life, trying to get elected. So they'll always go for subsidies, pumping more money into the economy, but not actually changing behaviors through reflecting the true social marginal cost of our consumption. Have you talked to politicians that are willing to take that risk? And what kind of political policies do you think are going to come to actually make that change?
I've had some amazing conversations with people at fairly high levels, at least as far as I'm concerned, about these issues, always with the door closed. Private conversations and public conversations are two separate things at this point. So part one is how can we create the openness so people can be bold and start having these conversations out in public. The one speech I hate the most, I hate it. I call it the retirement speech. On the last day that somebody's in a position of power, they come out and they say, let me tell you about all the ways this is all wrong. Like, oh, where were you for the last 20 years with that, right? They didn't feel that they had the territory to be bold with what they knew to be true. So how do we create that? That's part one. When you say understand the true cost of energy, yes, I understand what you're saying. So we're about to experience some externalities, as they call it, I hate that word, in the environmental cost of drilling in the Gulf. The Heritage Institute came out with a study that said, yeah, we charge $2.30 a gallon retail in the US, but if we add back in the cost of defending that oil through our military occupations and enterprises, how much does oil actually cost? And the answer is closer to $5 to $8 a gallon, right? But what I'm saying is I don't really necessarily want us to focus on the cost. I want us to understand the value of energy. It's something we might take for granted, but because it's so ubiquitous and it's been there for so long. But energy, the value of it is that you can do whatever you want with it. And until we appreciate that doing frivolous things with it is maybe not as important as doing really critical things with it, I think we're going to be hamstringing ourselves. So yeah, I'm really hopeful that politicians play a role in this, but I really think that this is up to us to make changes in our own lives. It's up to investors to put their money into places that it makes sense. It's up to industry. It's up to all of us. So one thing I really try to push back against is the notion of too big for me to solve. We really need Washington to do something. It's their problem. If they address it, I'm along for the ride. We're in this together. We're all in this together. So let's create the space so that politicians can be bold. That would be one part of this. And let's start understanding the value of energy, not just its cost as well.